Okay, the last one on here that I think is important is the reviewing of and updating of governing documents. That's expensive, tedious, time-consuming, and not fun. And yet it has to get done. If you have documents for your association that are grossly outdated, you should be talking to your attorney about what the cost is to update them. The good associations that are well-run, that don't have all the problems we may want to talk about, are the ones that keep that kind of stuff in order and know that their updated documents are in place. Here's the real thing about governing documents. It is the disclosure item that the state of California requires. So they're so hot on this that the CC&Rs have to be recorded at the state level. That means they get put into the recording process so that a buyer, when they go to purchase, gets a transcript of what's been recorded. They now have due notice of what the CC&Rs say. Whether they read it or not, they still have due notice. And that's how important the state thinks it is. Well, in that document, if it's referencing your rules and regulations and they're out of date, they don't really apply to you anymore, then we're giving them wrong information. It's a bad disclosure. So the governing documents need to be up to date. And here's one for you. I'll talk about this probably next year several times. If your governing documents reference the civil code, you hear me oftentimes reference 1365 or whatever it is in the California Civil Code, those numbers are all changing. Come 2014, the California legislature has decided through their Law Review Commission that they're going to change all the numbers and reorganize how the Davis-Sterling Act is read. And in their reorganization process, all those numbers get changed. If your CC&Rs reference back to Civil Code Section 1365.5 or whatever it is, your CC&Rs are not going to have the right reference. The buyer who buys into your community is not going to know, what are you referencing here? These numbers don't exist. What am I buying into here? You want to do them a favor of making sure the governing documents reference correctly. So here we are in 2012, and you now have due notice in 2014. There's going to be some changes made. Be aware of that. Start looking at it today. Do we have to change our governing documents because the civil code's changing? Shuey says we should, and I do agree you should, but that's a judgment call you have to make at your level to find out how important is that. I had a set of documents in one community drafted in 1975, and we changed them as I was leaving that community in 2008. I was there 33 years, and just as I had left, we changed the governing documents. But up until that time, they were up to date because the attorney who drafted them was forward thinking, and he put the Davis-Sterling Act in our documents before it ever got voted in. So did I have to change my documents? No, they were fine. We looked at it periodically, determined our documents are satisfactory, and we moved on. But we did take the time about every 5 years to have a look at it and see how are we doing. In a closer to home issue is your rules and regulations. In the rules and regulations, you all get to make the rules and regulations, so you can change those almost at will, as long as you follow the procedure of 30 days review process by your membership. But you may have a rule that says there'll be absolutely no street parking. And then you find out as the world turns, gee, most of our homeowners now have additional cars, and they have no place to park them. We better modify our parking rules to allow for street parking. If your rules still say no street parking, it's time to look at that and say we better change our rules. Or something like that. It could be most anything that is local rules where you recognize it just isn't up to date. Then take the time periodically at a board meeting to go over the rules. You need to prepare yourselves that this is coming down the line. So if the first thing you want to do is start looking at your existing documents. Do we have to make the changes? Do our documents reference back to the civil code? And if they do, then the answer is, yep, we have reference material here, so I guess we better start thinking about it. Then the next question is, how much is it going to cost when we finally decide to get it done? And then the next question is, how are we going to get it done? Who are we going to have do the work? That process of just determining, are we going to do it, and who's going to do it, and how much it's going to cost, etc., That's going to take you almost a year. So it all takes time. When you talk about we only meet between 4 and 12 times a year, and we only do business at board meetings, then we have to start planning early and have those kinds of things on the agenda so we carry on the conversation. So let's assume that today, here we are in March, and we're going to talk about the fact that we need to start looking to find out if our CC&Rs need to be amended based on the new civil code that's coming out in a couple of years. Why don't we appoint a committee to do that? Okay, well, who do you want to have in the committee? Oh, we'll argue about that next month. Okay, so now we'll go to next month, and we'll talk again about putting this committee together to work on the CC&Rs and go out and get us a bid, talk to our attorney or whatever else it is. And then maybe you finally figure out what attorney you're going to use. Then that attorney comes back to you with some kind of numbers of what it's going to cost to do it. And then we can find out what that cost is and decide how are we going to start putting the money together. I've only got about a year and a half left before I'm going to have this project accomplished. So I better figure out where's that money coming from. Now I've just learned it's going to cost $5,000 to do my new updated documents, and we have no money. Where's it going to come from? Well, that discussion is probably going to be a fight to the finish, but start talking about it early and start coming up with solutions on how to do that. So you see what I'm saying when I say start talking about it early? We're not talking about making the changes because your attorney's likely going to make all those changes for you. They're going to have boilerplate documents to help you. But you have to look at is, well, in our current CC&Rs, do we have language that we're really happy with, and we want to be sure that language carries forward in the new set of CC&Rs? Or do we have language we're clearly unhappy with that is wrong for our association? We want to make sure that's removed from our CC&Rs. So if you have that kind of thing, that's one more step that needs to be looked at. And those steps aren't easy. They cause arguments amongst the people who are working on them. So time is the issue there. The old CC&Rs were thick and hard to read, and usually in fine print. And typically, you turn to page 1 and it references page 25. You get to page 25 and it references page 66, and all this back and forth stuff. And it's just hard to read the CC&R sometimes to make sure you're following things. His question was, are they learning how to make them easier and to work with? And the answer is no. But they have done some nice things. In the new, more modern CC&Rs, they're putting what they call the maintenance matrix at the back of the book. We talked about that in a recent meeting here, where your association should have a matrix that shows who's responsible for what things when it comes to the property. And it includes things like the faucet on the kitchen sink and the pipe in the wall or the drain pipe under the unit. Who's responsible for those things? The painting of the outside of the front door versus the painting of the inside of the front door. And that maintenance matrix has been made a whole lot easier. That made life a lot nicer. But what it doesn't do when it comes to the responsibilities of the homeowner or the rules part of the CC&Rs, the covenants and conditions, it hasn't made it a lot easier because they have to put their legalese in there. And that legalese is what you and I have difficulty with. But they are learning how not to reference this page back over to this page and then down to this page here. They're getting better at putting that stuff together. I am pleased with most of the attorneys and how they're putting it together. And certainly, as you develop a committee to help review these documents, or you review them yourselves as board members, that's a thought you ought to have in mind, and actually prod your attorney and say, this isn't even readable. What I've done, and I recommend this to all the managers, is you take your personal set of CC&Rs and you highlight the keywords or key phrases, so you've got an instant reference that you can look at quickly and find things. And that's about the only way I can make it easier. I can't memorize multiple sets of CC&Rs, even though most of them are very similar. There are specifics for each association. So, yeah, governing documents are not a whole lot easier, but they say the new civil code, when it comes out, is going to be a whole lot easier. They're clustering things together, so everything relative to an annual meeting will be in one section as opposed to being scattered throughout the Davis-Sterling Act. I understand that there is a list out already existing of the new reference numbers to the civil code, but I wouldn't live on that. The fact is that the state legislature is not approving this until 2014. That's 2 years away. There could be a lot of changes between now and then. I believe most of the attorneys are purposefully leaving out reference to the civil code in the updates they've been doing for the last 6 months and probably for the next year or so. they'll leave that out. But I was talking to a manager of a La Quinta community just yesterday, and she said her CC&Rs are fairly new, like about 1.5 years, 2 years old, and riddled with all kinds of reference to the Civil Code. So if you're getting it put together, as you review the documents, keep that in mind. If they're referencing Civil Code to give authority to the value of the statement, they need to look at that and determine, you know what, we don't want to have to redo this again in a few months or a few years. Talk to your attorney about seeing what you can do to make them such that they'll be good documents for a period of years. Either put the new references in place, which is unlikely because it hasn't been voted in yet, or don't reference the Civil Code at all. Maybe make that reference a appendage page where when the documents finally get qualified, you just change that one page that references all the Civil Code. Maybe something like that will work.